So today we're going to go over roofs. So we're up to this point with our little model here. It's starting to look a little like something, like we might actually know some of what we're doing when we're building this thing. So first, we're gonna kind of do this upper roof. It's going to be the easier of the two to kind of create. So we'll build that one, and then we'll build this lower one here. So when building roofs and ceilings, there's one thing that is important to note. If you're going to be putting lights in the kind of ceiling of a space, that needs to be modeled as a ceiling, not as a roof, because lights can be hosted in ceilings, but they cannot be hosted in roofs. So if I make this roof a roof, and then I want to put some can lights or something in it, I'm not going to be able to do that. And same thing down here. So, but what I'm going to end up doing is using, this will probably be framed using scissor trusses. So the bottom, that top chord of the roof will actually be at a different pitch than the lower chord. And the lower chord is where the lights and stuff like that are going to be seen. So right now what I'm worried about more is getting the roof in here, and then we'll end up doing a ceiling at a different pitch for that lower chord, and then that will give us the kind of vacant space between the roof and the ceiling to create that void for the lights and stuff to sit up inside. What I mean by that here, if I show that real quick, if I have a, let's say this is my roof, and I want to put a light in here. If this is modeled as a roof, I'm not allowed to host a light in here. If I put a ceiling, like let's say I wanted to kind of trick the system and put a ceiling just below that. Maybe I make this all roof, and then the half-inch drywall on the underside is the piece that is the ceiling. That's also not going to work because my light is going to sit like this, and when it sits up in here, it's not going to cut out the void into the roof. So my light source is going to be inside the solid roof, and it's not going to emit any light down here. So what I want to do, and since I'm using scissor trusses, I'm going to end up with something that kind of ends up looking like this. So this is at a different slope than this is. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to model a real thin roof that it'll look something like that. And then I will come back, and when we do ceilings, I'll model that piece in. And that way when I stick lights and stuff like that in here, there's this void between here that the lights can sit up inside. And then when I go to do like construction documents and stuff like that, I'm going to end up having to detail this out anyway. If this was all one big mass, I'd have to put in some detail and stuff anyway. So having this line here and this line here, that gives me sort of a reference to go off of. And then I can kind of detail all of that out. So having this be void space isn't that big of a deal. It's mostly void space anyway when it's all framed out. So we're going to make the top a roof, and then the bottom a ceiling. So first things first, we're going to go ahead and do our roof. To do that, I'm going to go to my level 2 so I can kind of see that upper floor there. And I'm going to end up with a gable on the back and a gable on the front, and then it'll slope this direction and this direction. So I'm going to come to the architecture tab and go roof by footprint. And so in roof by footprint, it has a couple different roof types here, but we don't want to use any of these. We want to kind of make our own, just like when we did walls. We want to kind of know what's in our model, so I'm going to hit edit type. I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to put dash let's say we're going to do a metal roof on this thing, so we'll say metal roof, and we'll hit edit layer. And you have to have a structure for anything that you're making, like a wall or a roof or a ceiling, there's got to be some structure to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my structure the top chord of my truss, which will be 1.5 inches. And then over top of that, I will have my 3/4 sheathing, which will be my substrate. And then I will have my actual metal roof. So doing the thickness of the metal roof is a little tricky because you have the sort of standing seam. So do you make the thickness of the material the actual kind of plate metal, or do you do how tall the tip of the seam is? I tend to err on the side of going to the thinner material, which we'll say is like a 1/16 of an inch, and we'll call that our finish. And I'm going to throw a material on that and say create new, and we will call this metal roofing. We'll say OK. And I'm also going to take this and I'm going to add the poche to the structure, just so when I cut through, when I go to cut a section through or anything like that, I'll be able to see that kind of jump out at me. So I'll say OK. Now, I have all these tools up here. I can either sketch this just like I would like my detail lines, or I can use this pick walls tool. A lot of times the pick walls tool can come in handy. So if I go to just click this on, it's going to be right at the edge of the wall. I don't really want that. I want some sort of overhang on this. So when I have this selected, I have overhang options here, and I'm gonna put a 1.5 foot overhang on this. And so if I click all the way around here, that gives me my border of my roof here. Now you'll see these little kind of triangles on all four. That is telling you that that line defines a slope. And basically what that means is if you see a triangle, it means from this point it's going to slope off of this line. So it's going to move towards the interior. So this one's going to slope this way, this one's going to slope this way, this one this way, this one this way. But we want a gable on either end here. So we don't want slopes on either side here. So I'm going to check that box off and leave my two slopes here. If I were to check all of the boxes off, I would end up with just a flat roof. So I will go ahead and hit the check mark there, and it makes my roof. So if I go to my 3D view, you'll see because I made it on my second level 2, I've got it sitting kind of down here. So if I go to my south view so I can see kind of where this is, I want this to sit kind of right about in there. So I'll end up with kind of my scissor truss, but I'm going to extend the edges here. So I'll sit on top of my wall, and then it'll kind of take off there and end up with my kind of scissor truss here. So that'll work for that. I've got my roof there. If I want, I'm going to want this to fill in here. An easy way to do that, if I select all of these walls here, select all of those walls, I can hit attach top and base, and then just click my roof, and it'll jump all of those walls up to there. Now obviously this is a little thin, but we won't end up seeing how thin that is once we get our kind of fascia and soffit and frieze and stuff running all the way around that. You're not going to notice that. So that's not that big of a deal, and if I do a wall section through there, I would end up detailing that all out anyway, and you wouldn't end up noticing that. So not a big deal that these go up to basically what will be the top chord of my truss. So now I need to get into this section down here. So I'm going to come up to level 1. Actually, let's go to level 2. That way we can see the edge of this wall here. So I'm going to do roof by footprint again, and I've already got it saved my preset from before, and it's 1'6". So I'm gonna actually, I selected the wrong one there. I want to make sure I don't grab the stone. I want to go 1'6" off of my stucco. So if I come around here, just like this. So I left this chimney off because the chimney's going to come up and through the roof. So I'm going to actually draw around that. So I'll check those off. I don't want those to define a slope because those are just basically cutting around that. I'm going to do the same thing for this. So I will trim this. And I'm going to change this to fine. That way I can see the detail there. And I don't want this to come direct like here I will want it to come to the stone. Here I will probably want it to come to my substrate because that's where it's going to actually be kind of framed out to. So that'll work there, that'll work around there. I don't want this to define a slope. I don't want that to define a slope, and I don't want that to define a slope. It probably wouldn't be able to make the roof if I had those all defined slope because it'll want to slope this way, this way, this way, this way. There's just too many things going on, and it can't resolve all of those kind of angles and things like that that are kind of going on there. So I'm going to do a little covered porch here. And to do that, I want this to be a gable, so I'm going to turn the define slope off there. So I'm going to have a slope this way and a slope this way. And then I'll probably end up with a post out here somewhere. So let's say that this gable kind of comes back a little bit, about to that point, and then it'll come over. So we'll do something like that. Okay, so I want this to be turned off because I'm actually going to do a gable on the side here. It's going to slope up, it's going to slope down to this point, and then we're going to have a gable on this side. Which means these two, I will need that to... Okay, so this is going to probably give me an error and say it can't make it. Or it's going to look really goofy. And I'm going to show you what it's trying to do and then what we're going to do to resolve it. So if I hit my check mark, so it makes this roof. And if you notice, I want this gable to come up here, and I want this ridge to come all the way over to this point and then come down. But it's not recognizing that. It's recognizing that I have a slope defined here and here, and so it's trying to bring this all the way up to this point. So even if I check off, even if I say, okay, I don't want it there, it's still going to do the exact same thing because I have this one over here set as defining a slope. So what I want to do is I want to just define a slope in this one section right here. So the way I can do that is through a slope arrow. So I can hit edit footprint, and I'm going to turn these two off. And I'm going to use my slope arrow, and if this doesn't work, there's another way for us to go through doing it. So we will see how this plays out. So what I can do is draw a slope arrow and tell Revit, do I want to set a certain height? So I can say the difference in height from here to here is 2 feet, and it'll just automatically make that whatever slope it happens to be. Or I can say I want it to be a certain slope. And slope is what I want. That way I can define, same as all of these. These are 9/12 pitches right now. We'll be able to go in and change those if we want to. We could change it right now if we wanted, but we want to see kind of how this all looks first, and then we'll go from there. So if I put these two slope arrows there and hit the check mark, now that starts to look more like what I want. If you notice, it creates the gable here, and then it says, okay, well, these aren't defining a slope on either side, so I'm going to make a gable off of this and then extrapolate it back. So we'd probably have a little bit of a saddle condition in the corner here, but otherwise that works pretty well for what we're after. And then we'll end up with a little post down here, and we've got our little covered kind of entry there. So now we can bring these up a little bit higher so our chimney kind of sticks up. That's probably a little too high. Let's go down to, so there's our chimney. Let's bring it down even more. There we go. Okay, so we're starting to look like a nice little house here. So we've got our roofs on. I'm going to move this down to the level that we want. So if I bring this down and set it on there, I want to make sure if I go to my west elevation that my head height works here. So right now I'm actually right in line with the edge of that. And once I get my soffit and everything in, that's probably a little low because this is at 6'8". So let's move this up. Let's say we move it up like a foot. There we go. So that'll give us a little bit more space there. And now I can go around and select all of these walls. Grab this last one and hit attach to that point. So now I've got it attached all the way around. We will want to fill this part in here, but once we get our posts and stuff like that in, then we'll have a kind of reference line for how this is all going to fill in and get that looking the way we want it. So right now it's looking pretty decent. Not a bad, doesn't look too terribly small for a 520 square foot house, but it's looking halfway decent. So now we have our roofs in. We want to go through and do ceilings. So ceilings are a little bit trickier, especially when it comes to doing vaulted ceilings. So if you just want a flat ceiling is a piece of cake. We're going to have a flat ceiling in the kitchen, so we'll do that first, and then we'll get into, okay, how is this vaulted ceiling going to work here? So if I go to ceiling, my ceiling tool, I can do automatic ceiling, or I can do sketch ceiling. Automatic ceiling it's not filling this in because I have it at 8 foot. If I put it like 6 foot, if you'll notice, it's looking at the space and saying, okay, I've got bounding walls all the way around here. Do you want to just place a ceiling at 6 foot in this space? Sometimes that can be useful, other times not so much. For the most part, I end up using sketch ceiling. You'll see right now we're set to compound ceiling 2x4 acoustic ceiling system. That's not what we want, so we're going to go in and I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to say 1/2 inch drywall ceiling. And I'm just going to do the 1/2 inch drywall, so that way I have a gap between my ceiling and my floor above. When I make my floor above, it will just be the 3/4 inch subfloor. So I have that put in as a floor, and then I have my ceiling down below, and then I have void between those, so that way when I put my lights and things like that in, it's going into empty space there. So I will go ahead and delete this, and I'll make this 1/2 inch. And there is a default, there's a gyp board, but I'm going to go ahead and just name this. I'm going to call these ceilings, because what we paint our ceilings, what we make the material for this, is going to matter It can't just be drywall, because our walls are going to be drywall and everything else, and what those materials end up being is going to matter. So I'm going to make this a ceiling texture, and I'll say OK, OK, and then I'm going to sketch a ceiling. So when the guys in the field end up drywalling, they're going to drywall the ceiling first and then put the wallboard up. So the drywall on the ceiling is actually going to sit on top of the ones on the walls. So I want to go ahead and put it a ½ an inch in, so it sits right on that core boundary there. So I'll go ahead and place all that. Make sure we've got all of that in there. Now, remember, we're going to end up with this wall will end up going above, and we'll end up doing an arch and stuff. So we might end up editing where this line ends up falling once we get kind of the arch and things like that going on the interior. But for now, we're going to just say it's at that line. We'll come back and kind of edit that once we get all those details in a little bit later. I'm going to trim this real quick. So looks like we're pretty good there. And we are putting the ceiling at 8 foot off of level 1. It is room bounding. We don't really need any of this stuff, so we're okay there. And we click our check mark and we're good. So I'm going to throw a section in here, and if I throw a section across there and hit go to view, now you can see if I'm cutting through here, this is my bathroom here, this is my kitchen, this is that kitchen window, bedroom window up above, these are the windows over the sink. I'm going to throw this on fine so that way it post-shades it. And so then I've got this, I have my ceiling in here. This is my ½ inch drywall ceiling, so I'm good there. That should work out pretty well for me there. And then I can also put the same ceiling in my bathroom as well. So I'll go ahead and put in another ceiling, sketch it, and I'm going to go ½ inch off. And that way I can get it all in one go. It automatically sets it a ½ inch outside of the box that I drew, which was on the very inside there. And then I can hit my check mark. And now if I go back to my view, I can see my drywall sitting there and there. If you want this to kind of read a little bit better, you can take your ceiling and join it to the wall, and then it will cut through that little drywall section there. Whatever you click first is going to override the thing that's second. So I can click this one and click that wall, and then it will go ahead and eat into that, so it'll show this sitting on top of that. This little section right in here that'll be in between our floor and our wall, that'll be something that when you do your sections and stuff like that, you can come in and just get rid of that line in between there, because you're going to want to end up showing like your joists and stuff like that for construction document purposes and everything anyway. But for now, that works pretty well. That shows kind of the detail that we wanted, how that sits on top of that. And we should be good there. Now, getting into the trickier version, that is this vaulted area in here. So, we're going to have the gable. So we're going to have a little vault that goes this direction. It's going to come this way, and that's going to intersect with the larger one that's coming this direction and this direction. So to do this, if you come in, you hit sketch ceiling, and you go in and you set this all up exactly the way you want it, and you've got this all sketched out. So we'll go through and draw kind of where our borders are going to be. For all of this. Okay, so this is basically the limits of that ceiling. Now what we're going to end up having an issue with is, in theory, you can come in and say, okay, this is going to define a slope, and then this is going to define a slope, and I can go through and say, yeah, that's what I want. Ceilings do not let you define more than one slope like roofs do. Why that is the case, no idea. If they can make the tool work for roofs, I don't understand why they can't make it work for ceilings in the exact same fashion. It would help out a lot when it comes to doing this sort of stuff. But that is unfortunately not the case. Revit can't handle that, apparently. So if we turn define slope off, basically what we need to do is piece this ceiling together. And to do that, we need to kind of go through and figure out exactly kind of what's going on here. So what we're going to have is we're going to end up with basically a part of the ceiling that does this, and there will be a ridge that runs along here and comes back, so you'll end up with it sloping this direction and this direction, and then that's going to intersect with the overall kind of gable that's coming this way. So if we look at our exterior here, we've got our gable that's running this direction, so we need to figure out where the center point of this this gable is going to be. That way we can determine where the ridge line of that is going to be. So if I go up to level 2 ceiling, let's go to level 1 ceiling. There we go. So I have a point here, a point here, and if I go halfway in between there, that's approximately where the ridge in this hip is going to be located. If I go to my 3D view, I might be able to select that line in particular. So if I just grab that line, there we go. So now if I go back to my level 1, I get rid of this. Whoops. Nope, I want that back. There we go. So if I get rid of this, so this is my ridge line. I just grabbed that off of my roof. I've got my 2 sections here. I'm going to have a section that comes up this direction, then it comes back down this way. So we should be in pretty good shape. The only thing that we need to take into account is that this actually sits back a little ways. So if we go to our level 2 here, we can see that we actually have it sitting back to this point. So this is actually going to come up and back to that point, and we're going to end up with these little wedges that sit like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually grab all this. Now that I have this kind of figured out, I'm going to grab all of this and Control-C and copy all of that. If you're on a Mac, then Apple C or whatever Mac users are using these days. I've never been a big Mac person, so I don't know the hotkeys for you. So I have this all worked out, so I'm going to copy this. That way I can paste it in each time. But once I have that copied, I can get rid of this. I can get rid of these sides, and I can grab this section here. So now I want to define a slope. I will define my slope there. I don't want it to be a 112. Maybe if our roof is going to be a 1012, then maybe these are 812 pitches. So we'll go with that. And let's make sure that we get these are 912s. Let's make them 1012s. There we go. Now we've got a little bit higher pitch on that. Now if I go to ceiling again, sketch ceiling, I can hit Control V, and when I go to paste it in, it's going to show where the original was and how far off of that original I am. If I just, once I'm still kind of in this mode of placing it, I can type 0 feet and it'll place it exactly where it was before. So I already did this little piece, so I'm going to get rid of that one and grab this other side here. And I'm going to do a defined slope there. And this is going to be an 812. So we're good there. Place another ceiling in here. This is going to be this little section over here. So we do this, get rid of this part, get rid of that part. Now we need this to define our slope. It doesn't matter whether the slope is, if it's not going to make this flat and this define a slope, it's going to interpolate the entire thing as having a slope. So I just need a flat piece somewhere along that line to take off from. So I'll define that slope there. And then I need my last piece. Get the last piece in here. And that is going to be this piece. I'll unjoin that. And then I can delete all these. Define that slope. Make that an 812. I'm good there. Okay, so what I end up doing, what I end up with here, is a whole bunch of pieces of ceiling. So I'm going to hide my roofs here so we can see down into this and see what's going on with our ceilings. So I got all these little pieces and parts here that I need to kind of align and figure out exactly where they need to sit within this. So I'm going to go to the west elevation here. I'm going to hide this. And I am going to put this, instead of on hidden line, I'm going to put it on wireframe for a second. So that way I can see inside and see all of these different pieces. So I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to move this up so that it's even with that point. So my roof is taking off here. My roof is going at this slope. My ceiling is going at a different slope here. And then I need to make sure that all of this ends up lining up. So I'm going to align this one with that. And then this piece, if I grab one of these and move that, I've got this little line right here. I can grab that one. And I can grab that one. And so that should place all of my sort of roofs and different ceilings where they should be inside of my kind of space here. And you'll see with the wall sticking up here, this is going to be my cavity where the lights can sit inside there and give me some space for actually my can lights and stuff like that in between my ceilings and my roofs. Now, the one issue that it looks like I'm going to have is probably right here. So if I go to my level 1 and I'm going to throw another section in here, I'm going to throw that section right there and hit go to view. So here is my ceiling height. If this is my floor height, what is my height here? I've got 5'10" and 3/8, which basically means that I'm going to end up with not enough headroom for when you climb up that ladder to climb into that space. So I'm going to grab my roof, I'm going to grab my ceilings here, and I'm also going to, well, I don't need to change level 1 ceiling. I'm just going to vault this space a little bit taller. So instead of 5'10", I'm going to move this up another foot. That way I get plenty of space in there. I gotta grab this and move this up. So that works. Now I have between there and there 6'10". That's plenty. So that'll give me enough room to get a little doorway up into the lofted space, and if my ladder is sitting right here, I'm climbing up into a taller space for people to kind of move up and down through. So that gives me some ceilings, that gives me my roofs, and if I'm in level 1, let's see what that space ends up kind of looking like. If I do my drop down from the 3D view, I can grab a camera, and I'm going to stand back in this corner and look into my space here. So let's grab that. Let's throw it on the realistic mode and see what we have. Okay, so we've got our ceiling there. We've got our second floor wall we'll have to kind of play with a little bit. But you can see our gable kind of extending out that direction. This wall we can definitely start to edit and move to where we want it. So let's go back to that section here real quick. Now that I have this wall, I can hit edit profile, and with this wall I want it to sit basically on, I'm going to overframe it, I'm going to frame it basically on top of this this roof here. So if I take these and I'm going to split this line on the top, go there to there and there to there, and extend this one down to that point. That should look pretty good there. We'll hit our check mark. We'll say unjoin. Now if we go to our view, now I can see up into the bedroom space. So now you can see how this vaulted space is going to end up working. I've got my ceilings in here. I've got my ceilings up top. I just need to put a ceiling up in this top space here that will intersect with this this ceiling here. So then when I climb up my ladder that's right here, I've got plenty of room. It's nice vaulted space, big and open, and this doesn't feel too confining as we kind of get into everything. So let's go to level 2. And if we're going to vault this space, we'll go to ceiling, sketch, and I'm going to go 1/2 inch in. We're going to go there to there. And I'm going to vault it this direction. And remember, because I can't do 2 different slopes, I've got to do it in pieces. So I'm going to do this one. And I'm going to copy that line because that's my midpoint, and then when I paste it in, I'll have the other, I'll know what the other one is. So then I will define a slope there. Make this an 812. Hit my check mark. Do a second one. And we will most likely need to modify this ceiling a little bit because of how it's going to intersect with the other one, the one down below. So we're good there, we're good there. Let's define the slope there. Make that an 812. Okay, so now let's we're going to cut a section through this direction. So now we've got our 2 ceilings there. That works pretty well. That sits right on top of my wall there, so that should work pretty well for me. I need to bring it down just a little bit so that it intersects right there. I'm going to need to join the geometry, so just like we did with the bathroom and the kitchen, I'm going to join these so that way it sits right on top of my other one. Looks like I missed just a touch on that center point. So let's see. A good way to kind of determine how far off you are, I'm off 3/8 of an inch. So if I edit this, I can move this back this way 3/8 of an inch. Now if I come back, now it lines up perfectly. So I'm good there. That looks like it's all working pretty well. Let's move. This should actually be sitting down a little bit. I want to grab that one too. That way I've got all of these. And I want this to actually sit at 8 foot here. So if I grab that and then grab my thing, I want it back at that kind of 6'10" mark up here. So let's say I'm going to use a detail line. I use detail lines a lot for little stuff like this. I want this height in the middle to be, we'll say 7 foot. I want that to be 7 foot. And it keeps, it's 1/256 off. That close enough. We'll grab all of this, grab this, and grab the other one, and move this up so that this point ends up being right there. There we go. Now we should be in pretty good shape. So if I look at my 3D view, I'm pretty good there. I've got my vault. Looks like I'm in good shape up there. I don't have any intersection problems with this one, because this is actually sitting up higher than what the ceilings down below are. So we do have enough room so that I can get my header in. So I'll get my header in that runs across there for this bearing of this roof. So that looks like it's come together pretty well. So as far as ceilings and roofs, it looks like we're in pretty good shape, at least to start with. We can see our ceilings sitting down in here. One thing I will want to do is go through and join all of this. So if I go ahead and join these pieces of ceiling to the associated walls that they're going to kind of intersect with. I think I got that one and that one. I do need to get that one. So if I go through and make sure that I have all of that taken care of, then that will give me the look that I'm after. Grab that for the front, grab that one for the front, and grab that for there. There we go. And now all of those lines should be pretty well visible for the hidden line view. So now you can see this intersection here. We've got a little bit of a wall sticking through here, so we'll have to deal with that a little bit. Looks like we've got a little wall there, and we've got a piece of the roof here sticking through, but we can get rid of that when we deal with the roof up here. So last thing to do, we're gonna unhide our roofs again, and we're going to connect these two roofs together here. So I'm going to basically take these points, and I want to make sure that this gets framed over the top of that roof here. So you can see I've kind of got this weird intersection here. What I can do is come up here to join unjoin roof. And if I select an edge of this roof and then select the face of this, okay, so it's going to give me an error for that one because it's sitting below and coming up through, and it doesn't know how to cut around this whole thing. So what we'll do is we will go to edit our footprint, and I'm going to grab the line of this. So that's where my ridge line actually is. And we want this to extend over the top of this a little bit. So if I go level 2, this is going to extend over a little bit. and how far it extends over we will be able to figure out as soon as I get all of this taken care of. Let's get rid of that. I'm going to split this and do this. So I go to the south view and I say, okay, so I've got this line of the edge of my roof is extending straight up through there. So that's where my sketch line is right through here. So if I take this point, and it looks like I've got here. So from here to here is 11 and 113 1/28 to that roof. So that's how long I want to extend it in there. 11 and 123. Okay. So and 123, 128. So now, if I take this and move this back down here, oops, I don't think I snapped to that. Grab to that. There we go. Now it kind of extends over to that point. So now that I have that point, I can adjust this roof. So if I edit this one, now I have this point of reference that I can grab these 2 points and then say, okay, I'm going to split this line here and just trim these 2 back. Whoops. Forgot to turn off this define slope there. There we go. So now that starts to look exactly how we want it. And if we go to our 3D view, now that roof intersection isn't protruding into our space here. So we don't have an issue with that being a problem. Now this little intersection over here, this will end up getting resolved kind of as we go through and detail the interior. But for right now, this is starting to look like a pretty decent space as far as how things are kind of laying out and looking. So for now, we're going to go ahead and leave that one alone, and we'll address that kind of when we come to it. So for now, I think we're pretty good in terms of roofs and ceilings. Next, I think we'll start to get into placing our floors and our foundation walls. So that'll be next.